A gentleman knows how to correct himself. A petty person only knows how to correct others. Living in a world where everything is geared towards speed, achievement, and efficiency, does anyone still pause to ask how to live with propriety? And a deeper, somewhat inconvenient question. If our ego always precedes our understanding of others, are we truly living or merely reacting in an educated manner? The ancient wisdom on conduct, which you are about to hear, does not offer secrets to wealth, nor guides to triumph in negotiations. It won't make you admired, it might even make you uneasy. For within each passage, you will confront your hidden aspects: self-conceit, arrogance disguised as knowledge, subtle calculations cloaked in morality. But if you still possess the courage to examine yourself, to not shy away from the paradoxes within your own character, then welcome. You are stepping into a seldom traveled land. The journey unfolds through a first-person narrative, as if the author is recounting their personal odyssey through these insights. Now, allow me to guide you back to a space where words carry more weight than volume, where conduct is not a survival strategy, but the expression of seasoned wisdom and refined humanity. The question is, are you discerning enough to not only learn how to behave, but also to realize why you need to learn it now? Chapter 1, Self-Conceit *. One afternoon, like any other, sunlight streamed through my old wooden door, inviting me to look within myself. I sat holding a book, but my eyes were vacant, for the words before me were no longer mere text, but a mirror reflecting the deepest part of me. The self I had always thought of as proud turned out to be nothing more than a polished block of self-conceit. I began to recall an old incident. I was very young then. During a conversation with friends, someone sarcastically remarked that I spoke like a parrot. I forced a smile, but inside, a storm raged. I skipped dinner. I walked all night, gnawing on the feeling of being insulted as if someone had plunged a knife into my honor. What was it? Just a casual remark, but my self-conceit wouldn't allow me to let it go. In that moment, my self was no longer reason. It was a wounded beast, ready to lash out at anything. Later, reading the famous saying, "Among 3 armies, one can steal their commander, but one cannot easily sway the ambition of a common man," I suddenly understood. What people perceive as ambition is sometimes just self-conceit cloaked in dignity, a stubbornness adorned with eloquent words. I used to be that person, not once but many times. I was ready to argue to the bitter end with anyone, not because I loved the truth, but because I couldn't stand the feeling of being wrong. The pain wasn't in my being mistaken, but in the injury to the self-image I had constructed. Some called me resilient, others called me stubborn. In truth, they didn't know I was afraid of being looked down upon, afraid of being forgotten, afraid of no one acknowledging my worth. Self-conceit was the armor I wore, but it was also the shackles that bound me in loneliness. People say everyone has self-conceit. True, but some know how to place it properly, while others let it steer their entire lives. Self-conceit isn't inherently bad, it's a defense mechanism. But when we live in constant defense, we lose the ability to open up. I used to be in that state. Every piece of feedback was an attack. Every compliment was a ploy. Every glance was scrutinized for hidden meanings. I lived as if besieged by a hostile world, and my greatest enemy was my own imagination. I remember once, a longtime friend gently suggested that I spoke too much during arguments. It was a mild comment, appropriate for the situation. Yet I didn't speak to him for 3 months. I invented countless excuses to justify myself. I was insulted. What kind of friends don't respect each other? I was just defending my viewpoint. But it was all just a way for me to cover up the wound named self-conceit. Later, I met a teacher. He was calm, soft-spoken, always smiling. One time, I impulsively argued with him over a small matter. He didn't refute me. He just gently said, "It's fine if you're right, and it's fine if you're wrong, but do you feel happy trying so hard to win the argument?" That question was like a large mirror reflecting directly into me. Since when did I prioritize being right over connection? Since when did I lose my inner peace just to cling to a small victory? I sat back, sifting through my memories, recalling all the times I got angry at someone just because they didn't follow my lead. I suddenly saw myself as a child wanting everyone to praise me, validate me, indulge me, and throwing a tantrum if things didn't go my way. No matter how many layers of rationality we wear, self-conceit is essentially a demand for recognition. And when we don't learn to calmly recognize ourselves, we frantically seek it from others. We live through the eyes of others, only to forget the gaze of our own mirror. I once witnessed a child being yelled at by an adult, "You're useless." The child's eyes weren't filled with fear but shatteredness. I realized that the deepest wounds aren't from specific actions, but from the feeling of having one's worth denied. And such a child will grow up with an explosive self-conceit because it was once buried. Adults are the same. You cannot teach anyone by making them feel inferior. You can only guide them when they feel supported. I learned this not from books, but from my communication failures. Every time I criticized someone, they became defensive. Every time I humbled myself, they listened. I realized that arguments might be correct, but they shouldn't always be spoken. And silence is not defeat, but sometimes the only way to preserve mutual respect. Someone asked me, "So, if you live in fear of offending others' self-conceit, aren't you being insincere?" I smiled. I'm not afraid. I've merely learned that truth, if it wishes to be heard, needs to be wrapped in respect. A bitter pill is easier to swallow with a little sugar. I don't lie. I just don't throw the truth in people's faces like a hammer. Self-conceit cannot be eliminated, but it can be redirected. I learned to observe myself when emotions arose, when criticized. I didn't react immediately, I let it be. I asked myself why I was upset. If I found myself angry because my self-conceit was touched, I sat down and wrote it out, not to refute, but to understand. I discovered many times that people weren't wrong, I just didn't want them to be right. I also learned to apologize, not for being wrong, but for hurting others. One time I said something that made a close friend cry. I was right, but I felt small. I went to my friend, offered no excuses, just placed my hand on their shoulder and said, "I'm sorry for hurting you." In that moment, I felt myself grow more than ever before. After that, I began to re-examine how I interacted with the world. Every word, every glance, every reaction of mine became a clue to how my self-conceit operated. I discovered there were times I didn't truly listen to others, but only waited for them to finish speaking so I could retort. I wasn't conversing, I was competing. And each time I won, instead of feeling joy, I felt a little more alone. Deep down, I knew I didn't need to win, I needed to be understood. The danger of self-conceit lies in confusing self-love with arrogance. We think we are protecting our dignity, but we are actually just trying to hide insecurity. People who easily get angry at criticism are often deeply insecure. They need the world to reflect a beautiful image of them as a way of validating their worth. I used to be like that, and I was exhausted. On the journey of managing self-conceit, I didn't choose to eradicate it. Instead, I learned to converse with it like an old friend. When I feel insulted, I no longer react immediately. I let the emotion pass like a boat, not swimming after it, not resisting it, just observing. I ask myself, what makes me hurt? Why does a single word disturb my peace so much? And I realize that the pain didn't come from others. It came from silently agreeing with them, but not having the courage to confront it. That's a paradox. Strong self-conceit often comes with deep self-doubt. Truly confident people are more receptive to criticism. People who are unsure of their worth need a hard shell to protect themselves. For a long time, I lived like a hedgehog, bristling at every imagined threat, just to hide the tender heart within. Once I attended a seminar on conversational culture. The moderator, an elder man in his 80s, told a story that stayed with me. In his youth, a student argued with him in front of a crowd. Others expected him to get angry, but he just smiled and said, "You're right, I'm old, so sometimes I'm outdated." That remark silenced the entire room, not because he was weak, but because he was too strong to need to save face. I sat there and, for the first time, felt my self-conceit like a shirt that was too tight. I needed to take it off to breathe. I began to experiment. Every time someone criticized or gave feedback, instead of resisting, I would ask further, "Why do you see it that way? How do you think I should change? Can you elaborate?" Strangely enough, this openness softened people's tones. When I stopped defending, they stopped attacking. The conversation became gentle. Sometimes, I even discovered things about myself I had never seen. And gradually, I realized a strange but true fact. The less I let self-conceit control me, the freer I felt. I was no longer trapped in having to prove anything. I didn't need everyone to agree with me. I lived true to my thoughts and values, but without needing to impose them on others. I knew what I believed was right, but I also knew others had the right not to believe as I did. That's when I felt I truly began to mature. I say all this not to preach. I write as a way of recounting the journey I have traveled, the journey from someone living by ego to someone who knows how to diminish the ego for the soul to expand. I don't know who you are or where you are on that journey, but if any part of this story resonates with you, then perhaps you too are growing up, just as I once did. Self-conceit is not an enemy, it is a sensitive friend. If we know how to talk to it, if we are not manipulated by it, then it can become a part of our wholeness, like a deep, peaceful underground spring. Because in the end, living is not about pleasing everyone, nor about surpassing anyone. Living is about understanding oneself enough, understanding others enough, so that each day our heart feels a little lighter, just as when we learn to smile at criticism without having to stiffen and fight back. I took many years to understand that. And if you are just beginning, go slowly, but don't stop. Chapter 2. The concept of propriety in East Asia. When I was a child, I thought propriety ritual was something artificial, a mechanical bow, a hollow phrase, a coat of paint over society's rigid core. I had seen people who spoke politely but harbored calculating hearts. I had sat at New Year's feasts where adults toasted each other with refined words, only to step outside and curse. I had seen as a collective mask everyone had to wear to avoid judgment, and I hated it as one hates a tight uniform. But then I grew up, and like all who were once young, I began to stumble through life, scraping my knees. I joined a company working with strangers, people I owed nothing to, yet had to cooperate with. And for the first time, I found I needed more than ever. There, no one taught you how to survive hidden clashes. You could be intelligent, quick-witted, and skilled at your job. But if you didn't know when to yield a word, when to thank, when to bow at the right moment, you would be marginalized. I once witnessed a young colleague who, simply for interrupting his boss in a meeting, wasn't assigned any projects for a whole year. No one said anything, things just didn't go his way anymore. And when I asked, the boss just shrugged. He had reason but lacked That remark stunned me. It turned out that in the game of society, reason was never enough. Which I once considered cumbersome, was precisely what kept people from hurting each other. It was like a soft cushion, preventing clashes from becoming cuts. I began to relearn as if learning an old language. But this time, I wasn't learning to be praised as good. I was learning to understand people. I noticed how an old man unhurriedly offered a teacup to a guest, how a mother quietly picked food for her grown son, how a middle-aged man always turned back to bow to his elderly mother before leaving the house. All of it was not formality, but respect, a nonverbal language that could say everything. I remember once, when I returned to my hometown to visit my grandparents, my 8th grade cousin grumbled that he didn't want to bow because he was embarrassed. I didn't scold him. I understood that feeling the awkwardness of performing a ritual one doesn't yet understand. But I told him about a Japanese friend who once bowed to me, a deep bow, hands at his sides, eyes not meeting mine directly. At the time, I was surprised, touched, and bewildered because no one had ever bowed to me like that, and I never thought I deserved such a gesture. My friend said, "I don't bow to you because you are older or richer. I bow to you because I respect your presence in my life." I brought that story back and told my cousin, then stood up and bowed to our ancestors. This time, I didn't bow because someone told me to, but because I understood. I understood that didn't diminish me. It was a way for me to acknowledge that there are things greater than my ego in East Asian society. Is not just behavior, it is the rhythm of relationships. Maintains distance, but also builds bridges. It helps those below know how not to offend those above. It helps those above remember to be magnanimous with those below. Is an invisible covenant between people, which, if broken, causes all order to dissolve. I once attended a funeral where everyone was silent, only bowing before the coffin. No one spoke, but within that bow was an ocean of emotions: regret, gratitude, remorse. Without that seemingly formal ritual, perhaps the pain would have dissolved into chaos. That ritual, to me, is a way for people to navigate the transitions of life and death without falling into panic. The ancients said, "First learn then learn literature." I used to think it was a boring slogan, but now I understand that if you don't learn literature is merely an adornment for chaos. You can be smart, you can be talented, but if you don't know you're just a solitary individual with an inflated ego. Teaches you how to enter another person's life without hurting them. Is humility, not out of fear, but out of understanding. And perhaps the most important le I ever learned was on a rainy afternoon. I was arguing with my ex-girlfriend. I wanted her to understand me, but she just stayed silent. The more I spoke, the quieter she became. Then I angrily left. A few days later, she sent me a message. "You're always right, but you don't know how to listen." I sat for a long time with that sentence, and I understood that being right wasn't enough. Le in love is knowing when to stop, to take a step back to give the other person space to breathe. If I had known le, perhaps I wouldn't have lost her. From then on, I no longer saw le as an obligation. I saw it as a red light at an intersection, not to cause difficulty, but to prevent people from crashing into each other. Le keeps relationships from falling apart. Le is the anchor at the family meal, the thread between people in an increasingly noisy, hurried society. We live in an era where le is gradually fading. Children greet adults less often, adults listen less to children. Friends don't yield a word to each other, everyone is in a hurry, everyone is busy. But no matter how busy, without le, we are just individuals passing each other by, leaving nothing but collisions. I don't want to live like that, and I don't think you do either. I once met a young man intelligent, quick-witted, sharp-minded. But after a few months of probation, he was let go by the company. The reason wasn't his ability. I asked the manager privately and only received a shake of the head with a brief comment. "He's good, but he doesn't know how to make others feel respected." More specifically, he often interrupted older people when they spoke or used informal pronouns like I or you with people twice his age. He didn't mean to be malicious, he just didn't understand. Le is not about hierarchy, it's about maintaining harmony. The le of East Asia is not like Western etiquette. It's not dry, not confined to a few rigid rules. It's as soft as flowing water, permeating every gesture, every glance, every appropriate silence. I once saw an uncle who, at every meal, would always pick the best piece of food last for others before eating his own. No one taught him to do that, and no one counted how many times he had done it. But that was le. Le lies in doing the right thing without needing anyone to witness it. Le also lies in how we refuse. There are refusals that make people feel insulted, but there are also refusals that make the listener still feel respected. A person with le knows how to refuse without shattering trust. They don't say, "I won't work with someone like you," but rather, "I'm afraid this time we don't have the opportunity to work together." The difference in the saying isn't just in the words, but in the intention. A person with le never puts others in a difficult position, even if they don't particularly like them. I've been taken advantage of by that gentleness, and at times I felt tired of this, maintaining le. I asked myself, am I living a fake life? Am I playing a role to please others? But then I realized that le is not acting, it is choosing to live thoughtfully. I don't pretend to respect others, I just don't let the truth hurt them unless it's truly necessary. Le taught me when to be direct and when to be indirect. People often think speaking directly is honest and courageous. But I've learned that it's more courageous to know when to hold your tongue. When you truly understand that someone is vulnerable, you won't douse them with cold water with the truth. Le lies there, in the ability to read the cracks in others and know how to step around them without treading on them. I have a friend who is as direct as an arrow. Everyone says so. He often says things that are right, but also very hurtful. Gradually, friends distanced themselves, colleagues avoided him. He was distressed. He said, "I wasn't wrong. Why does everyone hate me?" And I said, "Because you forgot that being right without le is also a form of violence." That remark didn't change him immediately, but after many years he called me back and said, "Now I understand. Thank you for not being harsh then." And I see that le has greater endurance than reason. Sometimes I think if everyone in this society maintained a little le, perhaps things would be different. No need to love each other, no need to always agree with each other, just knowing le. We wouldn't hurt each other without cause a bow, a concession, a timely apology. These are small things that can preserve an entire relationship. Le is also a way for us to slow down in an era where everything is rushed. Le reminds us to pause, to bow when passing elders, to wait for others to finish their sentences, not to interrupt conversations with a phone. Le is the soft boundary that culture sets so that humans don't become wild in the name of personal freedom. I once saw a child who never said, "Yes, sir, ma'am," to his mother. He wasn't rude, he just wasn't used to it. And I wondered, is that unfamiliarity a sign that we are losing something? Looking at society, I see le receding. On social media, people readily insult each other over disagreements. In public, young people push and shove, elders are ignored. Le is no longer seen as necessary because le doesn't make money, doesn't put you on trending, doesn't make you famous. But le keeps you from slipping. Le is the handbrake, the anchor, the thing you will seek again when you are too tired of bumping into life. They say le is the shell and humanity is the core. But I see that without the shell, the core spoils. A person who knows le isn't necessarily a good person, but a truly good person always has le. I don't need everyone to be polite to me, but I choose to live with le as a commitment to myself, not to use my ego to diminish others. You might not be the smartest, you might not be the most talented, but if you have le, you always have a place. People might forget what you say or do, but they will not forget how you made them feel respected. And if one day you feel no one listens to you, no one understands you, perhaps you have held your heart too high and forgotten to bow down, not to humble yourself, but to see others more clearly. The le of East Asia is not outdated. It is the root. Lose it, and we are no longer ourselves. Keep it, and we can go very far without losing ourselves. Asterisk Chapter 3. Talent without humility asterisk. When I first entered my 30s, my mind was a forest of untouched ambitions, and my heart was a wild fire not yet extinguished by life. I read extensively, wrote prolifically, and debated sharply. I walked into meetings like an arrow in flight, no dodging, no deference, no looking back. Anyone who disagreed with me, I refuted. Anyone slightly wrong, I corrected. Anyone less capable than me, I put in their place. I thought, I am talented. I have the right to be superior. And indeed, I was superior in a cruel way. I made a colleague cry during her presentation by pointing out her mistakes right in front of everyone. Not a gentle word, not a moment to let her realize it herself. I wanted people to know that I was intelligent and she was not. Afterward, my boss praised my sharpness, but the entire room was silent, as if a cold shadow had just passed. On the way home, I felt no joy. That victory tasted bitter and salty, like a cough in a winter night, echoing and cold. I gradually realized that talent is not a sword, but a double-edged knife. Used incorrectly, it cuts not only others but also oneself. The ancients had a saying, to be talented and rely on that talent. The word for talent, tai, and the word for disaster, tai, sound similar. I read that sentence when I was 15 and only found it clever. After 30, I finally felt its sting. There was a period when I was constantly on guard. Because I was so good, I knew others were envious. I feared people would harm me, badmouth me, trip me up. But looking back now, I understand it wasn't because I was good, but because I was arrogant. Nobody likes a clever person who makes others feel small. What's the point of being good if it alienates people? I began to observe people who were genuinely respected. They didn't need to prove anything. They didn't boast, didn't belittle anyone. They simply worked quietly, meticulously, magnanimously. Once, I saw a senior colleague, someone who could intellectually dominate an entire room, yield the floor to a new employee, and then offer private feedback with humble words. I asked him, "Why didn't you just say it quickly?" He just smiled. "No one remembers what you say. People only remember how you made them feel." That remark was like a gentle tap on my chest, light yet searing. I had made so many people feel foolish, inferior, lowly, just to highlight my own shadow. I had won many times but lost many people. Talent, if not accompanied by humility, is just a forest fire, brilliant but destructive. For a while, I worked with someone inferior to me in every aspect, from expertise to processing speed. At first, I was very annoyed. I did things first, quickly, correctly. He did things later, slowly, making mistake after mistake. I felt I was being held back. But then I started listening to his questions, very naive, very unprofessional, but they made me think. Why do I do things that way? Is there another way? Why am I so sure I'm right? And gradually, I realized my cleverness had made me lazy about asking questions. I was used to reacting instinctively, forgetting to verify. He, because he wasn't clever, was forced to question, to be cautious, to understand each step. His lack of talent actually made me more profound. I began to see that sometimes, those who have nothing are the ones who give us the most. From then on, I stopped comparing. I no longer saw others as inferior versions of myself. I learned to step back, to yield the floor, to listen not because I was less skilled, but because I had stopped being arrogant. And I discovered a paradoxical but true thing. Truly talented people rarely flaunt their abilities because they know talent is only a small part of the human journey. You can know a lot, but if you don't know how to make others feel comfortable, you're still just a machine. And a machine, no matter how intelligent, cannot love. One time, I was invited to speak at a large conference, attended by many seasoned industry veterans. I prepared an elaborate speech, full of sharp arguments, updated data, and convincing examples. I stepped onto the stage with almost arrogant confidence, and as expected, I silenced the room. No one could refute anything. I spoke too fast, too decisively, too perfectly. After the presentation, I thought I had made a strong impression, but no one came to talk to me. Meanwhile, another speaker, older, who spoke slowly, occasionally rambling, was surrounded. People laughed with him, asked questions, shared. I stood in a corner trying to understand what had happened. I was better than him, there was no doubt about that. But he knew how to make others feel valuable. As for me, I only made them feel they were listening to someone too superior. At that moment, I deeply understood one thing. Talent is not a peak for you to stand alone, but a bridge for you to cross with others. If your talent makes people retreat, then it is not talent, but a cliff. When I was young, I admired heroes who carried everything alone, decided alone, saved the world alone. The more I matured, the more I saw that the truly admirable person is one who makes an entire team stronger. They don't stand in the spotlight, but they are the ones quietly keeping the rhythm. They don't take the prominent part, but are always the steady anchor. I also used to think that just being good was enough for success. But then I met people who were better than me and still failed. They failed not because of lack of ability, but because no one wanted to work with them long-term. They didn't know when to be silent, when to speak, when to concede. They demanded perfection, but forgot that working with people means working with their flaws, emotions, wounds, and fears. I have a friend who is extremely intelligent, went to a prestigious school, and was a strategic consultant for many large corporations. But everywhere he went, after a few months, conflicts arose. He always found everyone else inferior and didn't hide that fact. I once asked, "Why don't you hold back a little?" He said, "Because I want people to improve." But the truth is, no one improves when they constantly feel inferior. To make others better, you have to make them feel they can, not make them think they will never be as good as you. I realized that having talent is a blessing. Knowing how to use talent is competence. But knowing when to hide talent is wisdom. You don't need to display everything you know. Sometimes, holding back a part so others can shine is how your talent lives longer. I once helped a colleague rewrite a report. He presented it to the boss and was praised. I didn't say I was the one who drafted it. A few days later, he came back, took my hand, and said, "Thank you, sir. Thanks to you, I feel confident again." And at that moment, I understood that being the leader isn't always the best. Sometimes, being the support is the greatest role. I also experienced being left behind. Once I applied for a management position. In terms of ability, I was fully qualified, but the chosen person was a less prominent individual. I was bitter. I thought they were biased, that they didn't see my value. It wasn't until a private meeting with the director that I heard the truth. "You are too sharp. What I need is someone who knows how to make the team feel comfortable." Yes, I was too sharp, sharp like a knife. It could cut bread, but also easily cut hands. And in an environment that requires collaboration, that requires collective development, sometimes sharpness is a danger. Talent is a gift, but it only realizes its value when accompanied by an understanding of people. There are times you need to show off, times you should yield. There are battles you need to win, but also battles you should let others win so the whole team can advance. I used to want to stand on stage alone. Now, I feel happiest when I'm backstage, watching those I've helped succeed, not because they are better than me, but because I know. True talent is when you use it to lift others up, not to elevate yourself above them. When you have talent, don't fear no one will know. True talent always finds a way to spread, not through the spotlight, but through the grateful eyes of others. And you will realize the greatest reward is not applause, but the feeling of peace in knowing you have used what you have wisely. Chapter 4. Gratitude and Resentment. There are relationships in life that haunt me. Not because of unfinished love, nor painful goodbyes, but because of deep gratitude that quietly shattered, turning into resentment. What obsesses me is not betrayal, but the unanswered question: why does the person I once helped become the one who hurts me the most? When I was young, I thought gratitude and resentment were two parallel lines. I remembered those who helped me, and avoided those who harmed me. Everything was simple, black and white. But then I lived a little longer, experienced a few more heartbreaks, and realized that gratitude and resentment are not about what people did for me, but about how I feel when we no longer need each other. I once helped a close friend through the most difficult period of his life. I lent him money, shared my damp rented room with him, and walked with him every time he wanted to give up. Then, when he succeeded, he left me. Not a word of greeting, not a backward glance. I waited and waited, but no word of thanks came. Instead, I received a cold remark, "I owe no one anything." At that moment, I was angry, then resentful, then silent. But later, I understood that resentment wasn't because I needed him to repay the favor, but because I felt forgotten by the very person who once cried on my shoulder. And I understood a bitter truth. Sometimes people don't resent because they were hurt, but because they placed too much hope in gratitude. The ancients said, "The indebted are in a difficult position. The deeper the debt of gratitude, the easier it is to harbor hatred if one feels scorned." Because too great a favor can make people feel inferior, and not everyone is magnanimous enough to live forever in the position of the recipient. I once made others feel small when I kept reminding them of what I had done for them. I thought I was reminding them of affection, but it turned out I was choking them with the invisible rope of obligation. I learned that to give once and then forget is the way to truly give. To keep bringing up what you've done is the quickest way to kill affection. During a teaching trip to the countryside, an old man told me an old story. He once helped a friend rebuild his house after a storm. A few years later, he visited and casually remarked, "Luckily I helped you back then, otherwise you'd probably still be living in the fields." His friend just smiled, and from then on, they never met again. The old man was sad. I asked why he didn't stay silent. He sighed, "Because I thought saying that was recalling our bond." Who knew he would feel disrespected? I didn't know how to comfort him, because I too had said similar things, only to lose important people. And then I realized that people find it easier to forgive an enemy than to live with gratitude they don't know how to handle. Gratitude, if not accompanied by tact, can become a burden. Resentment, if expressed at the right time, can be a release. Thus, there are people who bear no grudges because they have never received a great favor, and there are people who resent those who once saved them, simply because they feel forever bound by debt. I once witnessed a child resent his parents, not because they didn't love him, but because that love was too imposing. "Because of you, I didn't remarry. Because of you, I lived a co-life." Such words sound sacred, but also make the child carry guilt for a lifetime. Love, when framed as a sacrifice, sometimes makes the recipient feel like a sinner, not someone loved. Someone asked me, "So, should we help people?" I said yes, but help them to go, not to stay, help them to be free, not to be bound to us. Gratitude, when placed correctly, is fertile ground for the tree of affection to grow, but if sown with expectation, it becomes a muddy swamp that drowns both. I once visited someone who had helped me tremendously during my student years. I bought a small, inexpensive gift, but full of sentiment. The old man opened it, smiled, and said, "I don't need gifts, just remember me." Then he told me about his relationship with an old student who, after becoming successful, never returned. He didn't blame him, he just said, "Everyone remembers in their own way. Some come back, some quietly help others, considering it repayment on my behalf." I fell silent, because in those words was an ocean of understanding people. I vividly remember that night, sitting silently in front of the old teacher's house, the yellow light filtering through rustling young leaves, the wind gently brushing my sleeves, yet I dared not knock. Not because I feared he wouldn't recognize me, but because I feared myself, returning as a belated debtor. I once thought that if I succeeded and returned, I would be worthy of expressing gratitude. But when I was still in an uncertain state, half submerged, half afloat, what value would my thanks have? But then I knocked. He opened the door, smiling exactly as he did the day I was an unconfident student, stumbling over my words during a presentation in class. And he didn't mention the old days, didn't say, "I once helped you this or that." He only asked, "What books have you been reading lately?" The way he treated me as a friend, not as someone indebted, choked me up. I understood that those who truly help us don't expect repayment. They help because they want to, not to keep a ledger. That's when I decided, if I ever help anyone, I will do it like him quietly, without conditions, without calculations. Because I know the feeling of being helped and unable to repay. It's not pleasant, it makes people avoid you. And if I try to pull them back with favors, I will lose the human connection in the process. In a conversation with a family psychologist, he told me about a strange but true phenomenon. Many children harbor resentment towards overly good fathers and mothers. Why? Because when you are always loved completely, without fault, you have no room to express your freedom. Everything is pre-decided. You don't have the right to make mistakes to grow up. You are placed in a golden cage of gratitude, and it is from there that cracks form. I was startled. It turns out that gratitude can also be a form of control. And if one doesn't know when to let go, the giver of gratitude will inadvertently create resentment. Have you ever loved someone so much that you choke them? Have you ever given everything only for them to leave? You blame them for being ungrateful. But have you ever asked yourself if you allowed them to be themselves in that relationship? I once witnessed a father give his son everything: a car, a house, a bank account. But when the son decided to drop out of school to pursue music, the father exploded. He called his son a traitor, ungrateful. The son left. Later, I asked him, "Why didn't you go back, at least to say thank you?" He said, "I thank him by not hurting myself anymore." I dared not judge, because in that answer, I heard the shattering of both sides. The giver couldn't let go, the receiver couldn't breathe. And I asked myself, if I were that father, would I be any different? We often think repayment is an action, but sometimes repayment is a choice of how to live. You live well, true to yourself, not forgetting anyone who lifted you up. That is enough. But when favors become a debt, every smile turns into coercion. I once witnessed a friend, out of gratitude for a benefactor, accept a loveless marriage. When she finally divorced, she didn't resent anyone. She only resented herself for living a lie for an entire decade just to not be ungrateful. From then on, I learned a principle: don't force anyone to repay a favor. If they remember, they will repay in their own way. If they forget, it's a lesson for oneself, not a reason for resentment. Because resentment, once it sprouts from gratitude, hurts more than any wound from a stranger. You can forgive a thief, but it's hard to forgive someone who once called you a benefactor. I too was once resentful, and I healed myself by stopping the counting of what I had given. I stopped repeating, stopped waiting, stopped expecting. I helped people because I wanted to, not because I needed a thank you. And strangely enough, when I let go, people came back not to repay, but to accompany. And I realized that gratitude and resentment are not two extremes, they are two currents flowing in the same river. If you keep your heart open, the water will flow smoothly. If you build a dam, resentment will overflow the banks. I choose to let that river flow through me gently, quietly, holding nothing back except the touch of human connection. Chapter 5, The Way of Firmness and Softness. When I was young, I liked everything to be clear. White was white, black was black. The strong won, the weak lost. I believed in the logic of the sword, of sharp words, of irrefutable arguments. I practiced martial arts. I loved rhetorical philosophy. I admired figures who could single-handedly confront the world. I used to think softness was weakness, yielding was defeat. Successful people had to be firm. But I was terribly mistaken. For the very times I strained to be strong were the times I shattered most quickly. The first time I was betrayed at work, I reacted like someone struck in the face. I wrote harsh emails, confronted directly, clarified right and wrong with every line of evidence. I believed that if I wasn't firm, people would walk all over me. I won on logic, but I lost in human relations. No one wanted to collaborate with me afterward. I walked down the hallway and every eye avoided mine. I spoke the truth, but I spoke like a blade. And I began to ask, if my truth closes every door, have I perhaps made a mistake elsewhere? I revisited the Tao Te Ching asterisk, a book I had once skimmed, finding it too obscure as a philosophy. But this time I read it carefully, and I was struck by a phrase like thunder. The rigid will break, the soft will endure. Water, though soft, can wear away stone. I fell silent, for I saw myself in the image of a rigid tree that could stand firm in a storm, but would snap when the wind was strong enough, while the bending bamboo branches weathered everything without breaking. I thought of my mother, a woman who never yelled, never argued. She just quietly, gently conceded. But I had never seen anyone my father respected more than her. She didn't need to speak loudly because she possessed an invisible resilience. And I began to learn anew, learning how to be soft, which was incredibly difficult. Because after so many years of living in a culture of needing to perform, my ego was accustomed to reacting. If someone touched me, I'd spring back. If someone criticized me, I'd correct them. If someone encroached, I'd bite back. I imagined that if I were soft, I would be swallowed. But then I tried. Once, a junior colleague publicly insulted me in a meeting. Everyone expected a counterattack. I smiled and said, "Thank you for your candidness. I will think about it further." The room fell silent. I said nothing more that day. A few days later, that person came to me, bowed his head, and apologized. No one pressured him, no one criticized him. It was my very gentleness that made him realize his own rudeness. And I discovered that softness is not weakness. Softness is controlled strength. It's holding the whip but not striking, knowing you can win but choosing not to strike. I also saw that in an old monk I knew, he was known for being so calm he was almost slow. People said he was too gentle, smiling at whatever was said. Once, a rude guest came to the temple, speaking carelessly. The monk still brewed tea, pouring it gently as if no storm had passed. After the guest left, I asked, "Master, why didn't you say anything?" He just looked at me. Someone who is burning needs water, not more firewood. I held my breath. I felt small in his gaze, not because I was scorned, but because I realized he was too vast. I wasn't capacious enough to understand. From then on, I no longer used firmness to handle every situation. I learned to observe. Sometimes, silence is the most valuable answer. A timely nod can resolve conflict more than 1,000 justifications. A gentle smile can diffuse a punch. I once witnessed two men loudly arguing on the street, almost coming to blows over a minor car accident. An old man walked by, patted both their shoulders, and smiled, "Come on, it's the new year, let it go, my sons." And that was it. As if the entire storm was dispelled by a fragrant breeze. I understood that firmness is a reaction, softness is proactive. Firmness comes from instinct, softness comes from training. I once heard a teacher say, to know how strong a person is, don't look at them when they succeed, look at how they react when insulted. That sentence stayed with me for a very long time, because I used to be unable to overcome small clashes. Just a careless word would make me angry, stiffen in self-defense, and retort sharply. At that time, I never thought I was weak. I thought I was standing up for justice. It took many years for me to realize that true justice doesn't need to shout, it just needs to stand firm. And I realized a paradox. The softer a person is, the harder they are to subdue. They are flexible, adaptable, they know when to retreat to advance further. While the rigid, when broken, shatter completely. I began to practice firmness within softness and softness within firmness. This means not losing my stance, but knowing when to be gentle to penetrate deeply. Like water, it is soft, but if it flows long enough, even stone will wear away. In my work, I stopped revealing all my knowledge just to prove how smart I was. I learned to ask questions, to listen, to leave gaps in conversation for others to have a chance to speak. Strangely, the softer I became, the more respected others became of me. No one saw me as weak, they only saw my inner peace. The way of firmness and softness is not a strategy, but a deeper layer of living. You don't learn it to cope, you live it as breath. And I realized that people who live at that deep layer often speak little, boast little, compete little. It's not that they lack opinions, but that they understand what is worth saying often doesn't need to be said loudly. What is worth doing often doesn't need anyone's recognition. I remember once passing by an argument between two old friends. One was red-faced, pointing a finger at the other's face and cursing wildly. The other just sat silently, saying nothing. After the first one left, I asked the silent man why he didn't retaliate. He just shook his head. I once owed him a favor. Today I consider it repaid. That statement confused me for many years because it contained not only forbearance but also wisdom. The other person lost his composure, while he repaid his debt not with money, but with a dignified silence. And I began to understand that softness is not retreat. Softness is when you know what you're doing and don't need to prove anything to anyone, like the wind, like water, like a mother. Once I argued with my mother. I spoke harshly, skipped dinner, slammed the door. My mother just gently knocked and left a bowl of hot soup, no scolding, no lecturing, just a gentle look. I ate in silence, tears falling with each spoonful. I don't remember what I ate, but I remember the taste of that soup for the rest of my life, the taste of magnanimity, the taste of the soft way. There are nights I sit alone in my room, thinking about how I used to treat others. Every time I snapped at a colleague, every time I yelled at an employee for a small mistake, every injured look I ignored. I don't blame myself, but I learned to apologize. Not always vocally, but always reminding myself, next time I will be softer. And I began to feel myself mature, not because I was better, but because I could restrain myself. I could yield. I could be silent, I could stand back, I could listen even to things I didn't want to hear. And I realized that each time I grew a bit more on my journey as a human being. The ancients taught, conquer self, restore propriety, become human. But I think before propriety, there must be softness, because if we are not soft, we cannot conquer our ego. If we don't know how to retreat, we will forever bump our heads against walls, thinking we are advancing. If we are not soft, our firmness is merely the hard shell of fear of being disrespected. Even now, I haven't completely lost my temper, but I know when I'm getting angry and I choose to step back. I still like to debate, but I learn to do it with open questions instead of thorny assertions. I still have my convictions, but I no longer need anyone to validate them to live. I think that is the way of firmness and softness that the ancients spoke of, not living to win, but living not to lose to oneself. Not to gain others' respect, but to not disrespect others' feelings. Chapter 6, Knowing How to Live. When I was young, I thought living meant running as fast as possible to reach the finish line before others. Fast to seize rare opportunities. Fast to feel alive. I used to believe that if I didn't have a clear roadmap, specific goals, and a daily plan, my life would slide downhill like a pebble rolling off a mountainside. And so I lived, but like a machine. I woke up on time, studied on time, worked relentlessly. I arranged every step like chess pieces on a board, nothing extra, nothing missing. I went online to learn time management, critical thinking, speed reading, fast writing, sleeping little. I turned every living moment into a unit of productivity. And then one day, I sat in a room full of books, in front of a flickering deadline screen, feeling like an empty, cold shadow, not knowing what I was living for. People often say, knowing how to live, as if it's a skill that can be learned. But I couldn't find any course that taught me how to take a deep breath without a purpose. No one taught me how to stand in the rain without rushing to take cover. No one told me that living, sometimes, is stopping, not moving forward. I started seeking out people who lived slowly, elderly men and women in the countryside, temple gatekeepers, cyclo drivers who weren't in a hurry. They didn't have 5-year plans or need reminder apps. But when I looked into their eyes, I saw something I lacked: inner peace. I remember one afternoon I stopped by a roadside cafe. An old man sat sipping iced coffee, watching people pass by. Curious, I asked, "Don't you get bored just sitting there, sir?" He smiled and asked back, "What do you do to not get bored?" I said, "I read books, work, study more." He chuckled, "Are you living or just trying not to starve to death?" That question hit me straight in the face like a bucket of cold water on a summer day. I went home and, for the first time, sat still for 30 minutes doing nothing. No phone, no books, no goals, just myself and my breath. And I burst into tears because it turned out I had forgotten who I was for a long time. Knowing how to live, to me, is not about how much you accomplish, but whether you are truly present for yourself. Can you hear the sound of the shoes you're wearing? Can you taste the aroma of your food, or do you just eat to fill your stomach? Have you ever looked at someone for a long time without secretly glancing at your phone? I once ate dinner with my mother, my mind still composing an email. I once walked with my lover, my eyes still darting around to check notifications. I once laughed with friends, my heart clenching at the thought of unfinished tasks. I once lived without being present, and I realized that living is not about doing something great, but about being fully present in the most ordinary things. One afternoon, I wandered into an old market. It started raining unexpectedly, pouring as if someone had wrung out the sky. I took shelter under an awning with an old woman selling vegetables. She used the hem of her ao dye to cover her soaked vegetable bundles, a smile still on her face. I asked, "With this rain, how will you go home, ma'am?" She just looked at the sky and replied, "I'll just wait." Her voice was soft as rain, carrying no hint of worry, no harshness, no rush, no complaining about the weather. And I suddenly felt my heart soften, because I knew if it were me a week ago, I probably would have called a taxi, cursed it under my breath, and considered it a bad day. Knowing how to live, perhaps, begins with not seeing every inconvenience as a catastrophe. I once read a sentence, the gist of which was that those who cannot wait are already dead inside. At the time, I didn't understand, but the more I lived, the more I saw that waiting in silence without complaining, without rushing, is the highest form of conscious living. For only those who still believe in tomorrow, who still have the strength to appreciate today, can wait without bitterness. Those who run too fast are afraid. Afraid of missing a beat, afraid of being inferior, afraid of being forgotten. And where there is fear, there is no room to live. I used to be in relationships where I never truly lived. I always played a role. The understanding person, the profound person, the kind person. I thought that if I was good enough, kind enough, I would be loved. But then I discovered that if you don't live truthfully in a relationship, even if the other person loves you, they are only loving the mask you wear. So what is knowing how to live? Perhaps it is living as if you have nothing to prove, not trying to impress, not seeking to make others love you, not stuffing every moment with achievement, just simply living without capitalization. I once sat having coffee with an old friend. He had a simple job, no fame, no high salary, but his face was always serene. I asked, "Why are you always so peaceful?" He replied, "Because I don't try to do anything to make others think I'm living well." That statement was simple, but it was like a latch unlocking a door I didn't know I had closed. It turns out, knowing how to live sometimes means living less for others to see. Once I walked past a beggar sitting by the roadside. He didn't extend his hand, didn't say anything, just sat looking at the sky. I left a bill. He looked at me, didn't say thank you. I was a little surprised, but then realized he wasn't asking me for anything. I was the one who initiated. And I suddenly felt light. Because in that moment, I didn't need anyone to acknowledge my kindness. I helped because I could, and that was enough. The more I mature, the more uncomfortable I am with people who constantly try to project an admirable life. I used to be like that, posting photos with beautiful light, philosophical statuses, milestones of achievement. But when I turned off my phone, I felt empty. I didn't know what my own feelings were. I only knew what others would think when they saw me like that. And I stopped, not completely abandoning it, but I began to ask myself each morning, today, if no one were watching, what would I still do? If no one praised, no one criticized, no one expected anything, how would I live this day? Knowing how to live for me now is when you can eat a meal alone and not feel incomplete, read a book without needing to show it off, love someone without turning them into a trophy, help someone without needing a thank you. And most importantly, dare to be sad without feeling guilty. Because there are days when living is simply surviving, no need for beauty, no need for glamour, just needing you not to give up. I used to think knowing how to live was a state. Now I believe it's a process. A process of shedding layers of expectation, brushing away layers of noise to return to oneself. It's the process of learning to breathe, not to achieve anything, but to remember that you are still here, still alive, still able to touch the world with real hands, with a real heartbeat, with an unjudgmental gaze. And if you ask me what knowing how to live is, I won't answer. I will just invite you to sit down, pour a cup of tea, and share the silence. Because perhaps only in silence can we hear the first and last voice of life. We are present here, now, with ourselves. That is enough. Final part, the Confessions of Kyuan. My name is Kyuan. Or, more precisely, I was Kyuan, the one who wrote Li Sao in The Long Night of Officialdom, the one who stood in the imperial court feeling like a lost soul in a desert. I was not born to oppose anyone. I simply could not betray my own heart. But in a world where the glib were respected and the honest became suspect, integrity was a crime. And I, who bore the crime of honesty, was banished far from the capital, from my aspirations, from all that I once believed was righteous. Some say I was a poet, but my poetry was no flowery dream. My poetry was a throat-tripping cry in the night, blood oozing into words, pain wrapped in verse to make it less raw. Every word I wrote was an unhealed wound. I wrote poetry not to celebrate, but to resist, to preserve a part of my soul from being crushed in what they called the way of the world. I once believed that if I lived uprightly, the world would naturally distinguish itself. I took nothing from anyone. I did not flatter. I did not deceive the king. I kept my heart pure, like holding a full bowl of water, passing through a treacherous path without spilling it. Yet in the end, I was deemed a threat. People feared me, not because I was powerful, but because I could not be bought. Those who cannot be bought are the most dangerous in a court accustomed to living by exchange. They banished me, called me arrogant and verbose. They said I confused the king. They said I thought myself purer than everyone else. They didn't understand. I never thought myself superior to anyone. I just refused to stoop. I wandered in foreign lands, looking at the plants and trees, seeing myself in them. In the early days, I still resisted. I still hoped someone would understand me. I still sent poems, ideas, warnings about the approaching disaster, but people didn't listen or listened and sneered. I began to talk to the clouds, the river, the stones, because only they did not interpret me with prejudice. I wrote like someone on their deathbed, writing a final testament. My poems were full of questions, not to heaven but to myself. Why did I live this way? Why couldn't I pretend like everyone else? Why did an honest heart lead to such an impasse? And I gradually understood the world does not reward those who live truthfully. The world only admires those who win. If you are honest and poor, you are considered foolish. If you are upright and fail, you are deemed arrogant. If you dare to say what people don't want to hear, you will be pushed to the margins, even if it is the truth. I blame no one, for I too at times wanted to be silent, wanted to conform and asked myself, if I had compromised, would I now live peacefully, with power and an easy voice? Perhaps. But I knew I would slowly die in that false body. And that slow, smoldering death would be more terrifying than being cast into exile. I once stood before the Milluo River, its waters flowing silently as if all the world's sorrows converged there. I looked down at the surface. I did not see my face, only the shadow of a person who had been rejected. Not by the court, but by the very people I once loved, to whom I offered counsel, believing that if they awakened, the nation would change. They didn't refute me, they just offered a faint smile. In that smile, I was no longer a person, I was an anomaly, and so they won. No need for banishment, no need for punishment. Just by indifference, they turned me into a fading shadow. But strangely, I have no regrets. Though I have wandered, though I am exhausted, though my heart is full of cracks, I still believe. There is something pure within me that has never fallen away. It is not fame, not preached morality, but the survival of a heart unblemished, like a gem buried in the earth, shining silently even when covered in mud. I wrote Li Sao, not to resent the world, but to preserve the last scent of faith. If I did not record what I saw, what I felt, soon even I would doubt myself. Poetry, to me, was not a game of words, but the only way I would not turn to stone. And when I cast myself into that river, I did not seek death as a desperate man. I went as one who had lived to the fullest and could do no more. Death at that moment was the period after a truncated epic, the final beat of one who could not be silent. People remembered me after I died. They erected statues, wrote books, etched my name into history. They called me a patriotic poet. They quoted my words to teach their children. But when I was alive, they turned their backs. I do not resent them. I only hope that those who are living, if they carry a shred of honesty within them, will not wait until everything decays before smelling the stench. Do not wait for the truthful to die before seeing the wisdom in their words. Someone asked me, Yuan, if you could live again, would you live differently? I would not. I would still say what needs to be said, even knowing that my fate would be rejection. For I would rather live a life misunderstood than a false life lauded. I do not need admiration. I only need to see my own face when I look in the mirror. You can call me foolish. But if foolishness is holding onto one's humanity in a world full of cunning and coldness, then I accept it. You can call me tragic. But if tragedy is still knowing pain, still feeling sorrow for what is decaying, then I do not wish to be numb. You can forget me. But if at some point you find yourself unable to remain silent in the face of injustice, unable to go along with wrong, then perhaps I am still there in your voice. My name is Yuan. I died in a river, but I live in every person who still dares to uphold what is right, even if it costs them their entire life. We have just journeyed together through a not-so-short path. Not a journey through pages, but through each layer of thought, each sedimentary layer left by the ancients, as if they knew that we, later generations, would be lost in a world too noisy and lacking standards to stand still. If you have listened this far, I do not consider it mere patience. I consider it an act of courage, the courage of someone who knows how to pause and reflect. In an age where people learn how to win quickly rather than how to live, you chose to sit down and listen to the words of the ancients, not because they are old, but because in that oldness, you found something that is never outdated. I offer no hollow thanks, only respect. for listening to ancient wisdom on conduct is not simply hearing. It is how you allow yourself to re-ask the big questions about the value of life, the limits of the ego, and all the things no one teaches us in school. If you found this challenging, even segments that made you doubt yourself, then congratulations. No profound book unsettles you before it brings understanding, just as no inner journey goes without dark passages. I hope you will take a moment to reflect on your experience, not for me, but to see what you have found in these words that seem to have been dormant for centuries. Your feelings, whether agreement or disagreement, are a continuation that allows these insights to live another lifetime.